The year was 1865, and the frontier was a land of both opportunity and death. The sun hung low over the dusty streets of Helena, casting long shadows on the weathered buildings. Olivia's heart beat like a drum in her chest, its rhythm loud enough to drown out the sound of the creaking boards beneath her boots. She stood at the threshold of the brothel, her mother's hand tight on her shoulder, pushing her forward as though she were nothing more than an object to be bartered. "Do as you're told," her mother had whispered, her voice rough with years of hard living, the words foreign on her tongue. "It's the only way out." Olivia barely heard her. She could smell the whiskey before she even stepped inside, the sharp, sour scent that clung to the air like a disease. The door swung open, and she was swallowed by the dimly lit room. She was a young woman, barely 18, with the kind of beauty that turned heads and made men lose their breath, though she hadn't yet learned how to use it. Her dark eyes flickered to the far corner where the brothel owner, a man named Bart, sat with his feet kicked up on a chair, a cigar dangling from his lips. Bart's eyes never left her. He was a tall man, older than most, with a face scarred by years of hard drinking and harder living. His grin, when it came, was thin and cold, like the blade of a knife. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, his voice smooth, oily. "Another lost lamb, looking to make her way in the world?" Olivia felt a cold knot form in her stomach, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mother's grip on her shoulder tightened, her fingers digging into Olivia's skin, urging her forward. "She'll be good for the men," her mother said. Her voice was shaking now, as if she too feared what was coming next. "She'll do whatever they ask. Just make sure she's safe." Bart's smile grew wider, and he leaned forward, sizing Olivia up like a piece of livestock. "I don't deal in promises of safety," he said, flicking his cigar onto the floor and grinding it under his heel. "But she'll be well taken care of for a price." Olivia's chest tightened. Her mother had promised her this would be a temporary arrangement, that they would find a way out, but Olivia knew the truth. There was no escape from men like Bart, no escape from the life her mother had dragged her into. The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating her. Bart stood up slowly, the creak of his boots on the wooden floor loud in the silence. He reached out and ran his fingers over Olivia's cheek, his touch like ice. "A fine piece of work," he muttered, as if she were an item to be sold, nothing more than flesh and bone. "I'll put her to good use." The words were like a slap to her face. Olivia didn't know whether to cry, scream, or simply fade into nothingness. She didn't know what kind of life she would have here, but she had no choice. Her mother had sold her, and there was no going back. Bart's eyes flickered to her mother, who stood in the doorway, her face pale. "You can leave now," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'll take care of things from here." Olivia's mother hesitated, her hands trembling. For a moment, Olivia thought she might change her mind, that she might pull her away and tell Bart to go to hell. But instead, her mother nodded, her face hardening, and turned to leave. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed in Olivia's soul. Olivia stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. She was alone. Alone in a place where she had no say, no voice, no control. And yet, even in that moment, she could feel the flicker of something deep inside her, a spark of defiance, though she couldn't yet name it. Bart motioned to a chair in the corner. "Sit down," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "You'll learn the rules soon enough." Olivia's legs moved on their own, carrying her to the chair. She sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. She was not crying. She had cried enough in the past few years to last a lifetime. Instead, she locked away the pain, buried it deep inside her, where no one could see it. She had to be strong. If she was going to survive this, she had to be strong. Bart paced in front of her, his boots clacking against the floor. He stopped, glancing down at her with a smirk. "You're not much for talking, are you?" he asked, his voice heavy with amusement. "That's fine. I don't need to hear you speak. But I'll be keeping an eye on you just the same." A shiver ran through Olivia's body. She could feel the heat of his gaze, the weight of his attention pressing down on her. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped. It wasn't long before the other women in the brothel began to take notice of her. They came in and out, each one with a story of their own, some with eyes hollow from too many years of hardship, others still holding on to a shred of hope. Olivia didn't know if she had the strength to become like them, but she feared she was already halfway there. And then, as if the universe had heard her silent prayer, he appeared. Eli was a man who walked into the brothel like he owned the place. Though his manner was calm, his eyes hard as steel. He had the look of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and still hadn't found the peace he was searching for. His face was weathered by the sun, his body built for hard work and even harder survival. His eyes, when they met Olivia's, told a story all their own, a story of pain, of loss, and of something more. Something she couldn't name yet, but that made her feel something stir inside her. Olivia tried to ignore him at first, but it was impossible. His presence filled the room, like a breath of fresh air in a place that reeked of decay. He walked past her, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second before he disappeared into the back of the house. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Over the next few days, she saw him again and again, always just out of reach. He never said much, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made Olivia feel as though he understood her pain. He wasn't like the others who came and went, using the women for their own pleasure. No, Eli was different. He was a man who had learned how to survive by the strength of his own will, and Olivia felt that strength in the very air around him. One night, as she sat in the corner of the brothel, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey that she didn't want but accepted all the same, Eli walked in again. This time, he stopped in front of her, his gaze steady and unflinching. He didn't speak at first, just studied her with those piercing eyes, as if searching for something. Finally, he spoke. "You don't belong here." His words were simple, but they struck her like a lightning bolt. Olivia looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope, of something more. Maybe he saw the same thing in her that she saw in him, a desire for escape, for freedom, for something better than this life. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eli's lips curled into a faint smile. "Someone who's seen enough to know when it's time to get out." Her heart hammered in her chest, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. In that moment, Olivia felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was just the fleeting chance to feel human again. "I want to leave," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Eli nodded. "Then we'll find a way." For the first time since the day she was sold to the brothel, Olivia felt the stirrings of a dream she thought had long since died. But she knew better than to believe in fairy tales. The road ahead would be long, and the dangers would be real. Yet, standing before Eli, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could escape the darkness that had held her captive for so long. As Eli turned to leave, he glanced back at her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "You're not alone anymore." Olivia sat in the silence of the room, her heart still racing. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she believed it might be worth the fight. The night was thick with dust, a haze that clung to the land like a shroud, heavy with the weight of secrets. Olivia had never seen the stars so dim, their lights smothered by the endless stretches of brown earth and the winds that whispered through the canyons. She sat on the worn porch of the small cabin Eli had led her to, the faint sound of crickets in the distance masking the tension that hummed between them. He had promised her escape, and yet the reality of it felt so much darker than she had imagined. Eli stood a few paces away, his back turned to her as he surveyed the horizon. The firelight flickered across his weathered face, casting sharp shadows that seemed to mark the passage of his years. He wasn't a young man. No, he had lived a life that had aged him beyond his years, but there was a quiet strength about him that made her feel something she hadn't in so long. Safe. But safety was a fragile thing in this world, and Olivia knew better than to believe it could last. "I don't know how long we can stay here," Eli said, his voice low, like the growl of a distant storm. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Things are going to get harder from here on out. You need to be ready for that." Olivia swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening as she met his gaze. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the shadows that had followed him across every trail he'd walked. She didn't know what it was like to live as he did, always on the move, always looking over his shoulder, but she could feel it in the way he carried himself, in the way he barely ever let his guard down. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. There was a part of her that wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of what she knew, even if that safety had been nothing more than a cage. But another part of her, an unfamiliar part, was willing to fight for the chance at something more. She had to. Eli exhaled slowly, his eyes softening for a brief moment. "We'll make it work," he said, his words carrying the weight of a promise, though the doubt that lingered in the back of his voice told a different story. The night stretched on, long and heavy, and Olivia found herself caught in a strange kind of limbo. She was no longer the girl who had been sold to a brothel by her own mother, but she wasn't yet the woman she needed to be. She didn't know what Eli saw in her, why he had chosen to help her, why he had offered her the chance at a life beyond the dirt and the dust, but the pull between them, this unspoken connection, was undeniable. She needed him, but more than that, she needed the hope he had brought with him, a hope she wasn't sure she deserved. The sound of hooves broke the stillness, a single rider coming up the narrow path toward the cabin. Olivia stiffened, her heart thudding in her chest. Eli's hand went to the revolver at his side, his movements quick and practiced. He didn't need to ask who it was. They both knew that someone was coming, someone who could bring both trouble and opportunity. The rider appeared in the distance, the silhouette of a man against the faint moonlight. Eli tensed, his body going still as the figure drew closer. It wasn't until the man dismounted that Olivia recognized him. His name was Cole, and he was a part of Eli's past, a past Olivia had yet to fully understand. "Thought I might find you out here," Cole said, his voice gruff, his features hidden by the brim of his hat. He was a man of few words, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. Eli didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. They were both too familiar with the kind of unspoken communication that had grown between them in their years on the road. Olivia stood up, her hand instinctively brushing against the worn fabric of her dress. The air was colder now, and the chill seemed to sink deeper into her bones. She didn't know what had brought Cole here, but the weight of it hung heavily in the air. "You've been gone too long," Eli said finally, his voice steady, though there was a sharpness to it that betrayed his unease. "I told you we'd be fine. You didn't need to come back." Cole shrugged, his movements deliberate and slow. "Couldn't leave you to handle this mess on your own. It's been brewing for a while now. You know how things are." Olivia watched them both, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what kind of mess Cole was talking about, but she had learned long ago that trouble had a way of finding men like Eli. Trouble followed them like a shadow, always close, always waiting for the right moment to strike. "What kind of trouble?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole turned to her, his eyes hard as stone. "The kind that doesn't go away, no matter how far you run." He looked back at Eli, his gaze narrowing. "There's talk, words getting around about you. About both of you." Eli's jaw tightened. "What kind of talk?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Cole's eyes flicked to Olivia, then back to Eli. "The kind that says you're running from something, and that something has a way of catching up to people." The air between them crackled with tension. Olivia didn't need to hear more. She could see it in their eyes. She could feel it, too, the weight of the past pressing in, threatening to crush them under its force. She wasn't sure what Eli had done, what kind of life he had lived before he found her, but she knew it had been one filled with blood, with danger, with choices that had no easy answers. "You should go," Eli said finally, his voice cold and clipped. "I'm done with that life. I'm not going back." Cole shook his head slowly, his lips curling into a grim smile. "You think you can outrun it, Eli? You think you can just walk away? You can't. You never could." Eli's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the grip of his revolver. Olivia could see the struggle inside him, the conflict that had defined his every move. He had never been a man who liked to talk about the past. He had buried it, shoved it down as far as it could go. But the past had a way of clawing its way back to the surface. "You're not welcome here," Eli said through gritted teeth. Cole didn't flinch. You know where to find me if you change your mind. And with that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps muffled by the dust as he disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and Olivia felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Eli stood there for a long time, his eyes fixed on the spot where Cole had vanished. Olivia didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She couldn't pretend to understand everything that had just happened, but she could see the way Eli's shoulders were stiff, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. He wasn't just running from a past. He was running from the consequences of it. Finally, Eli turned to her, his face softer now, the tension in his body still present but slightly eased. You need to understand something, Olivia, he said, his voice low. I don't want this life for you. I don't want you to get caught up in it. But if we're going to make it out of here, if we're going to survive this, we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to face the shadows and the dust. Olivia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she wasn't running anymore. The past might be a shadow that followed them, but she was ready to face it. With Eli by her side, maybe they could outrun it after all. The wind had changed. It howled across the barren landscape like a beast, a thing alive with fury, tearing at the earth, scattering dust and sand into the air until it seemed the very world itself was coming apart. Olivia stood at the edge of the canyon, her body tense, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was low, casting a fiery red glow over the endless stretch of wilderness. It was beautiful, yes, but in its beauty lay a quiet threat. The frontier was a place where nothing stayed still, where nothing was safe for long. She could feel it, a gnawing sense of impending danger. Eli had told her to stay inside, but she couldn't. She couldn't bear to be cooped up in that cabin any longer. Not with the weight of what loomed on the horizon. She turned, her heart quickening as she saw him approaching. Eli's figure was a dark silhouette against the glowing sky, his gait deliberate, each step purposeful. He was a man who had seen more than his fair share of violence, a man who had learned to live by his instincts. But today there was something different in the way he moved, something more urgent in the set of his shoulders. You should be inside, he said, his voice rough with the strain of the day. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were focused ahead, scanning the land for something that Olivia couldn't see. I couldn't stay in there, she replied, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. It's too quiet. Eli's eyes flicked to hers for a moment, something unreadable passing through them. He exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the chill air. It won't be quiet for long, he said, his words heavy with meaning. The fire's coming, Olivia. I can feel it. She nodded, though she didn't fully understand what he meant. He had spoken before of the violence that followed him, of the past that had a way of catching up with the present. But the fire he spoke of felt like more than just metaphor. The heat in the air, the sudden stillness before the storm, it all felt like a warning. They didn't have much time. The sound of horses' hooves broke the stillness, and Olivia's stomach tightened. Eli didn't move at first, his eyes narrowing as the riders appeared on the horizon. There were 4 of them, dark shapes moving at a steady pace, their outlines sharpening against the dimming sky. Trouble, Eli muttered under his breath, his hand going to the revolver at his side. Olivia didn't ask questions. She knew enough by now to stay silent, to follow his lead. The 4 riders drew closer, their horses kicking up dust with each step. Eli's hand hovered over his gun, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He was waiting, watching, measuring. The leader of the group was a tall man with a scar running down his face. His eyes were cold, as hard and unforgiving as the stone that littered the ground beneath them. He reined in his horse just short of Eli, his gaze flicking to Olivia before settling back on a man beside her. Eli, the man said, his voice like gravel. I thought I'd find you here. Been looking for you. Eli didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The tension was thick in the air, a palpable thing that hummed between them, heavy with unspoken history. The leader smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that men wore when they knew they had the upper hand. You've been hiding out too long, the man continued, his voice casual, but there was a hardness to it that made Olivia's skin prickle. You think you can run from it? From what's coming for you? Olivia could feel the temperature drop, the silence between them stretching, growing heavier with each passing second. Eli's fingers twitched toward his gun, but he held them back, his gaze fixed firmly on the man in front of him. I'm done with that life, Eli said, his voice low but firm. I don't owe you anything. The leader's smile faltered for just a second, but then it returned, sharper this time, full of malice. You don't get to choose, Eli. You don't get to walk away. There's a price for everything you've done, and it's time to pay. The other riders shifted, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons. The air crackled with the tension of men about to draw, about to let the past speak for them in the only language it knew. Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, and she knew, deep in her bones, that this was the moment when everything would change. She took a step back, moving quietly, her eyes flicking between Eli and the riders. Eli didn't notice her retreating at first. His focus was locked on the man before him, the fire in his eyes telling the story of a man who had been dragged back into a life he had hoped to escape. The leader's voice cut through the silence like a whip. You can't protect her, Eli. Not from this. You never could. Olivia felt her heart stutter in her chest. She knew they were talking about her now, but the words were more than just threats. They were the raw edges of something darker, something that had been brewing for far too long. Eli's hand was at his side, his fingers closing around the grip of his revolver. But before he could pull it, the leader lunged forward, faster than Olivia had expected. There was a flash of movement, and then the world exploded into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. Olivia ducked, her heart thundering in her chest. She had heard gunfights before, seen the aftermath of them, but nothing could have prepared her for the violence that erupted in that moment. The riders weren't just here for a confrontation. They were here to end it. Eli moved with the speed and precision of someone who had seen too many men die. His revolver was drawn in an instant, and he fired without hesitation. The leader staggered, a shot to the shoulder knocking him off his horse, but the other riders were quick, too quick. One of them fired back, catching Eli in the side. He grunted, his body jerking with the impact, but he didn't go down. Not yet. Olivia's instincts took over. She ran. She didn't think. She didn't question. She just ran, her feet pounding the earth beneath her, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She had to find a way to stop this, to end it before they both ended up dead. She ducked behind a boulder, her heart in her throat. She could hear the gunfire, the grunts, the curses of men who thought they were invincible. But Eli wasn't invincible. She knew that now. He was a man who had lived too long in the shadows, too long with a past that had been chasing him down like a pack of wolves. And now it was catching up. She didn't know what came over her in that moment, whether it was desperation, courage, or was something else entirely. But she knew she had to act. She had to save him. She grabbed the rifle she'd hidden earlier, the one Eli had used to hunt. She aimed it at the rider closest to Eli, her hands trembling as she steadied herself. The crack of the rifle broke through the chaos, and the rider fell. The remaining riders stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears, and she dared not move. Eli was on his feet now, bleeding but alive, his gun still in hand, his gaze fixed on the remaining men. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The leader's face twisted in fury, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might charge, might risk it all for vengeance. But then, with a growl of frustration, he signaled for his men to retreat. They left, but the fire still burned between them. Olivia knew it wasn't over. Not yet. As the dust settled, Eli turned toward her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. There was no triumph in his gaze, no relief, just the quiet understanding that they had won a battle, but the war was far from over. He staggered toward her, his steps unsteady, and then collapsed onto a rock, clutching his side. Olivia ran to him, her breath ragged. You're hurt, she whispered, her voice shaking. I've been hurt worse, Eli said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. But his eyes, those eyes, they told her everything she needed to know. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for redemption.